Please welcome Jane Connor.
Thank you all. Well, it's my pleasure to talk about George Washington, who's known throughout the nation. Growing up in California, I remember my mom always making cherry pie, telling me the story about George Washington and all. And I'm sure all of you grew up knowing him wherever you grew up, whatever state you grew up. But we have him here in Stafford County. First of all, here is the story that you probably all grew up knowing about George Washington chopping down the cherry tree. And his father said, "Did you chop this down?" And he said, "Father, I cannot tell a lie. I did." Well, that actually didn't happen. This is Mason Locke Weems. He was a minister, and he was in Monica. Are you recording the whole thing?
No.
Oh.
It's gonna get a little bit, I'm gonna make you nervous. Go ahead.
No,
Please
I
don't.
was just afraid that
No.
I'm going to be talking a long time, and I was thinking you
No,
might not
just
have
a little.
enough power on it. No, not at all. But this is a minister that lived in Dumfries, Virginia. And after, they called him Parson Weems, and after George Washington's passing, he decided to write a book about Washington. But all of his information was actually biblical. Like in the Bible it says, part of the Ten Commandments, you shall not lie. So he wrote this story. Oh,
Is that on? Yeah, can you use that?
yeah, sure. Is this better for people at home?
Yeah. It's better for me.
And for us too. But anyway, he wrote little stories about George Washington, but it always had a twist. So, we're going to jump ahead in time, and here is Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln was at Stafford's own Chatham, and he decided that he was going to go down to the Rappahannock River and go into Fredericksburg. So I'm going to point over here. Do you see that bridge? In the very back there, that's Sophia Street. And these are canal boats that were brought down from the C&O Canal up in D.C. And they made a bridge going across. And Lincoln left the hill that Chatham is on and went down by a carriage to go across, as I said, to meet his officers in Fredericksburg. Well, he was at the bottom of the bridge, and he looked up the left, up there, and he saw that soldiers were on the hill, and that was where Ferry Farm is right now, up on the hill. And he was so excited to think that his men were up there and camping there. And so anyway, this is what he thought about Washington. Washington is the mightiest name of earth, long since mightiest in the cause of civil liberty. May I be pardoned if, upon this occasion, I mention that way back in my childhood, the earliest days of my being able to read, I got hold of a small book, Weems' Life of Washington. I remember all the accounts there given of the battlefields and struggles for the liberties of the country. So who would have thought that there was that tie-in? This is supposed to be a picture of George Washington's father, Augustine. And his name was Augustine, but no one called him that. They always called him Gus. And you can see where he had owned lots of acres of forest area in Stafford. It's now called Augustine. Augustine after him. He was the genteel class, extremely wealthy. He was married before with a family, and he was part owner of the Principio Company. The Principio Company would melt rocks, I guess you would say, that were iron bearing, and then do different things with them, and I'll go into that later. One time, George's father, Augustine, or Gus, frequently left the colonies and went into England and back and forth doing business. Well, when he was coming back, he didn't realize this, but his wife, Jane, passed away. So when he got home, here he was with children and realized that, he had to find someone to take care of the children, and he needed a mate. Well, he ends up marrying Mary Ball, and she came from a very wealthy family. She was fatherless at the age of 3, orphaned at 12, and she was placed under the guardianship of her uncle, George Esrick. Remember that name, George Esrick. Okay, now, George Esrick was the Burgess of Westmoreland. He was a colonel, and guess what? He was a brother-in-law of Augustine Washington. And in 1731, he's a matchmaker, because he introduces his recently widowed brother-in-law, Augustine, or Gus, to Mary Ball. And they marry, and they move to Pope's Creek. And that is where George was born, February 22nd, 1732. Now, Augustine owned 450 acres. I've never used this machine before, so, okay, I can move it. Excuse me, guys.
Are you on the bottom slide?
I was, and I think I'm okay now. Now, the Principio Company wished to construct an iron furnace on Accokeek Creek on land leased from Augustine, and they did so in 1726. The furnace used coal, which was created by the nearby trees. And this is what the furnace looked like. And you can see at the top, they're entering in the rocks containing the iron, and it would be melted. And notice on the right-hand side, you'll see the wheel going round and round. And that part of the rock that is not containing iron, do you see the guy at the bottom there? That's the slag, or the part of the rock that doesn't contain iron. And the guys down below, over here, that's usually sand, and they make a mold in the ground, and so that the liquid or molten rock goes in there and forms what is known as pig irons. And this is a picture of actual pig irons. And 2 of these pig irons were given by the Blaisdell family. Betty had passed away. She was past president of this organization. But she gave 2 of those for our Stafford County Museum once we get one. So I think that's so exciting that we're going to be getting that. Now, you can see here is the sand on the ground and making more pig irons. Now you might say, why in the world are they called pig irons? Look at this picture. Can you see why they're called pig irons? Okay, the raceway at Accokeek Furnace is made of, you can see the slag, or the rock that's not used for iron is there, but this is the raceway at Accokeek Furnace. down. Okay, this is a sign that was put up behind, the sign was placed at Colonial Forge High School, and the sign was placed there in 1984. And the school opened up in 1999, but what did they name it? They named it Colonial Forge High School. It should have been what? Furnace. It should have been called Colonial Furnace High School. A forge is an area where they would get the metal and then hammer it or mold it into large kettles or whatever like that. So James Hunter had an ironworks close by the Rappahannock River in Stafford County. And they said, had it not been for James Hunter's ironworks, we probably would have lost the Revolutionary War. That's how much he did. And there still is an old forge neighborhood in Stafford County that touches the Rappahannock River. And that furnace, or that forge, went all the way from Old Forge neighborhood, paralleling the Rappahannock River, and it crossed over today's I-95, and it ended up in Carter's Crossing Shopping Center. So that's how extensive that ironwork was. Now, in 1738, Augustine and his family wanted to be closer to this operation. So they moved to Struthers Farm. This is today's Ferry Farm. And George was 6 years of age at the time, and it was built by Struther around 1727 to 1728, and the family called it not Ferry Farm, they called it Home House. But Augustine passes away when George is only 11 years of age, and Augustine leaves most of his property to his other children. But George finds his father's surveying compass at his home, and you know that's what he did, land surveying. George stays at Home House from the age of 6 till around the age of 22, when he goes to live at Mount Vernon. Now we're going to be traveling ahead in time to the early 1900s, and this gentleman is known as J.B. Colbert. He was quite a businessman, I guess I should say that about him. And he wanted to make a buck off of various things. And he was a realtor, and he was always trying to sell. Okay. He was always trying to sell things, and he wanted to sell pieces of the land where Washington was. But you can see his home is that white brick building on the side, but do you see that other little structure on the left-hand side? He said that that was actually where George Washington George Washington's father, Augustine, taught him how to survey. He called that the surveying house. And so he would tell people, oh, don't you want to come and see where George Washington learned to survey? And for a while, the Lytton, in the 1940s and 50s, the Lytton family lived there and continued to share Ferry Farm's most the myths about chopping down the cherry tree and things like that. But the Lytton children kept the cherry tree stump there, which was to actually been part of, descendant from George's cherry tree. but the stump was revered by visitors and treated like a shrine. Now listen to this, I think this is funny. Charles Litton remembered in an interview that when one trunk was used up, he and his brother Taylor crossed King's Highway to cut down another cherry tree and sell parts of that trunk as pieces were in such a demand. Now, a family by the name of the Carsons lived on the property and were the ones who probably built the shed. It is thought it was probably built in the 1860s. That was a full 100 years after Mary Ball Washington left the farm. So there's no way at all that that could have been where George learned how to survey. Well, Mary Ball, she wanted her son to stay at home since, the other children were up north at Mount Vernon. And George actually bought her a home in Fredericksburg, but she loved the water at Ferry Farm so much that every day she'd send servants over to get water for her to drink. Well, J.B. Colbert wished to get rich off of the Washington history of the land, and so he kept telling that story about that little shed is where George's father taught him how to do surveying, and this is the area where he chopped down the cherry tree. The myth just kept going and going and going. And, I talked about that already, didn't I? And so, local historian and project supporter of Colbert got lots of people to be interested in, telling the story of the land, because he wanted to sell parts of the land and get rich off of it. And he had a local historian and project supporter, Chester Gulrich, penned a few newspaper stories about Ferry Farm and featured the old office of George Washington. That's what it says on the top of that postcard. And local historian and stationeer R.A. Kitzbach created that postcard that I showed you there. And Colbert was all excited about getting lots of people interested in telling these stories. And at the top of the postcard it says, George Washington's surveying office on the Washington farm. Now, it was the bicentennial of Washington's birth, and Herbert Hoover plants a cedar tree from Ferry Farm at the White House. And I called the White House and I asked if it's still there. No, it didn't survive. It only lasted a few years. Now, this was Colbert's farm, and a science fiction and travel writer by the name of George Allen England appeared upon the scene. In Colbert, England found a man with a story to tell, and in England, Colbert found a man who could tell it. Now, a gentleman came into the area, and he was trying to rebuild in Washington's Pope's Creek home, where he was actually born, called Wakefield. And Charles Arthur Hoppin was his name, and he thought that if Ferry Farm developed as Colbert and England had wished, it would take away the visitors from his own development of Wakefield. So therefore he made it his goal to discredit and undermine Ferry Farm's historical claim to Washington himself, and Hoppin continued to do anything to make Wakefield the premier Washington site. Now, February 3rd, 1940, Ferry Farm was big enough to make national newspapers. On that chilly morning, locals gathered to witness the farm on the auction block. Colbert had died in 1931, and his daughter, Maybelle, was $25,000 in debt for the 470-acre farm. Okay. Well, in 1963, Youth for Christ International became the latest party to take on monthly payments. They bought it. And the pastors believed that this would be a place where troubled youth could live and where they could benefit from living and learning about places of the great Washington's childhood. The boys' home was built, but by 1968, the home closed its doors and the pastors looked for a buyer to help pay their debts. Now, doesn't that building look familiar?
Yes.
This is Ferry Farm's actual visitors place now. But in 1969, Samuel and Irma Warren became Ferry Farm's new owners. They understood the historical value of the farm, but they wanted to do what they could to make profit from the site by selling off parcels. And they requested a B1 commercial rezoning. Into this mix came a gentleman by the name of Robert Segrest. He went to Stafford's Board of Supervisors. Joe, I don't know if you recall this, that when he did that, I don't know if you were on the Board of Supervisors then, but he said he would preserve the farm and turn it into a tourist destination. The supervisors promised to give him money for the Ferry Farm project, $500,000 for 5 years as long as they could see progress. And Segrest would go daily to the site and talk with visitors. Now, guess what? Mr. Segrest said that Colbert's home, he called Washington's home.
Oh, no.
And so he would give them tours all around the thing. But on September 26, 1994, the Colbert house burned to the ground, and so went the dreams of Mr. Segrest. In 1995, many in Stafford County were shocked when Walmart wished to build on the Ferry Farm site. The Stafford County Historical Society went into action. We made signs, posters, red, white, and blue ribbons, pins. And in 1995, we all thought, Walmart on historical grounds? We were so upset about that. And you can see the gentleman in the front with the gray jacket on it is Steve Gambaro. Steve was very active in our historical society, and he and his wife, she was a Native American, and they helped build the Smithsonian Museum of the Native Americans up in DC. And you can see Steve there and me with blonde hair, so you can tell how long ago that was. But anyway, we had a buddy in C.M. Williams. He was the county administrator for 19 years. And C.M. did things like when Stafford Hospital was built, he gave the Historical Society 44-foot long wall. So when you go into Stafford Hospital, you'll see the historic wall there. We put that together, and Dale Glasgow was the artist that put it up there, but C.M. really loved this. But he said on the sly, he was telling us that the Board of Supervisors really wanted Walmart to build there because they wanted revenue to it for the county. And so speaking before the Board of Supervisors got us nowhere at all. And so anyway, there was a woman from California that called me because I was president of the Historical Society at the time. She said, I'm from California and I have lots of family members that were Roses that lived in Stafford County. And she said, I've never met them, but I've corresponded with them. Would you take me around? So she came to Kenmore Inn and was staying at Kenmore Inn. I picked her up. And here I found out that she was from Eagle Rock, California. She was a little bit older than I was. My dad had the glass shop in Eagle Rock, California, and her dad had the automobile dealership in Eagle Rock, California. And we never we couldn't believe that we both met in Stafford, Virginia and everything. So I took her around to meet all the Roses, and she said, oh, I want to become a member of the Historical Society. So she became a member of the Historical Society, and on the monthly newsletter, I wrote all about Walmart wanting to build there. And she said, Jane, I'm coming up to DC, and I want you to come up and bring the Proffers up there. She said, we can't have them building on Ferry Farm. That's too important a place. And she said, in 2 days, you're to come back up here for a meeting, and I'm going to set apart 10 minutes for you to talk. And I want you to get a piece of paper, and I want you to print on there so that you can get 4 pieces. I want you to put a town crier on there and give the address and the phone number of Bentonville, Arkansas, the headquarters for Walmart. So anyway, I did that. I couldn't find a picture, but this was like sort of the one that I had. And it wasn't colored like this, it was just black and white, but I couldn't find one that I did. Somewhere I have it in some of my belongings, but I can't find it. So anyway, I put that on there, and she said, was anything found on the property? And I said, yes, one pewter plate belonged to the Washingtons, was found on the property. And she said, come, try and get that plate and tell them that if Walmart builds on there, there's no way that anything can be found under the concrete parking lot like that. So I signed my life away. I got the pewter plate that they found there, and I appeared before them, and I told them that story. I held up the pewter plate and I said, if Walmart does that, I said, I just drove out to the Walmart in Spotsylvania County, and I said there were paper bags all around, blowing around, and birds doing whatever they were doing out there. And I said, pigeons, there were pigeons out there at the time, but so many bags were flying around. And I said, if that happens, this will not be saved. And I'm asking all of you from each state, I said, I have lots of these. If you pick up 2 of these little flyers, and I want every single state to hear from Walmart that you don't want it to be built there. Well, people came up to get 2 copies, and they said, we want more, and thank goodness I ran them off. And guess what? Because we kept telling them, why don't you move Walmart down the road and save Ferry Farm? And so guess what? They heard from every single state of the union, and guess what they decided to do? Move 1 block down. So we were so delighted by that. And so Bentonville, Arkansas heard from Stafford County that day, or the next day. Now we have Washington Square with Walmart moving down. We have other buildings there, other stores came too, and Ferry Farm Visitor Center is now the old boys home. And in 2006 and 2008, Dave Maraca and Philip Levy started doing archaeological work there. Dave Maraca is now the head archaeologist at Ferry Farm, but Philip Levy graduated from William and Mary, but he worked there too. His major was archaeology, and the both of them worked there. Now he's in South Florida. But anyway, he wrote a book all about the discovery. And so they actually found the foundations there, and they found artifacts like teapots, teacups, stemware, and teaspoons. suggested Mary wished to keep up the genteel appearances and British traditions from someone of Augustine and her class. And they found wigs, ceramic hair curlers, and over 31 enslaved men worked in the yard at Ferry Farm on the wigs. Can you believe that? They also found Betty Washington's spoon. You can see the BW on the top there, and then also a tambour hook. And you see on the right, I put a picture there of what a tambour hook can do. I think that's so pretty. And then we had to educate the public because we wanted to rebuild Ferry Farm. And so we educated the public, and then Ferry Farm had a replica groundbreaking in 2015. And that's when they discovered the actual foundations of there. And they discovered when they were widening, I think it was I-95, they discovered big boulders of quiet stone. And they thought, oh, this would be great to put upon the foundations that were there. And so they rebuilt it. There's Dave Maraca there rebuilding the replica. And it took from 2015 to 2018. And you can see there's the original foundation at the bottom and the new foundation right on top. So they rebuilt it, and it was just wonderful. I was very much honored because they had me at the dedication of the Ferry Farm replica. On the left is Bill Gardner. He's the president, even today, of the George Washington Foundation. Ceci Howell, and on the other side of me is her husband, Bill Howell, who was Speaker of the House of Representatives, and Congressman Whitman. This is what the Government Island sign looked like. All the signs in Stafford County used to look like this. But things changed in 2008, I should say, because all those signs were taken down and up came Stafford, Virginia, George Washington's boyhood home. And that's supposed to be Boy George playing with a hoop. So this is what the signs look like now, and they're even on our water towers. But this, I think, is so interesting. George Washington and his father, Augustine, actually left a legacy, because if you look at the National Registry of Historic Places, there's George Washington's Ferry Farm, Accokeek Furnace Archaeological Site, and Hunter's Ironworks, all three in Stafford County. So they're finding even more things today, even those about Native Americans at there. And I encourage you to find new findings. You know, take your child or your grandchild there, or your friend's child there, to see what's going on at Ferry Farm today. So you are a wonderful audience. Do you have any questions? Do you have any questions? Yes.
Are you aware of any connection between George Washington's furnace efforts and providing all the different solutions for early in industry, and also as that would have coordinated with Spotswood Furnace and the other side of the river with Colonel Spotswood? Are there any conversations that might come to mind?
Not that I know of. Yeah, other places in Stafford, there have been some coordinations.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for sharing that tremendous
Oh,
history.
thank you.
I guess my question is, prior to the decade of the Walmart, almost fiasco, but all those decades where it was going from family to person to the pastors, didn't the U.S. government ever step in and say, hey, all these other places in the country where almost nothing happened, we have a national historic monument of some kind. And I just am shocked that nobody along the line, other than say Hoover, planting a tree, really stepped up and said, why aren't we preserving this place for the government to come in and buy the property?
Yeah, you would have thought so, but no. But I think it was probably because of Colbert. Colbert really wanted to make money, and he thought that he could do it by attracting lots of tourists there and then selling off plots of, don't you want the land that George Washington walked upon? You know, why don't you buy this plot of land or that plot of land? But it really didn't work, yeah. That's a good question. Yes,
Yeah, I
John?
just wanted to add, Alvin Bandy lost the election partly because of the Ferry Farm fiasco. And Bill Beck got elected mayor in the city of Fredericksburg partly because of it. So political upheaval happened because of the Ferry Farm fiasco. I also want to add that the trail that I'm proposing that would go with the road, there's also another, east to west trail that would go from Belmont to the Cannon Ridge Golf Course. And the trail would go by Hunter's Iron Works, Hunter's Island, some of the canal locks on the Rappahannock River. It would go by some fortifications from the Civil War. There's also Indian prehistoric sites, Indian campsites, and I mean, you can just check off the list. The Mud March was in that area, so it'd go by that waterfall that I have a picture of. It would go by the balloon corps. The first time balloons were used in warfare were in that area, so it would go by that also. So, then to link in, I'm also proposing a boardwalk that would go to Accokeek Furnace. Be very similar to the boardwalk at Government Island, and it would go up the resource protection. There's a lot of land there that's wetlands, so it could go right across. Skip over the wetlands on the boardwalk, and so anyway, I don't mean to cut in on you, but I'm just kind of fired up. I see all this potential that we need to put it together, and let's show our history.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate your passion.
Okay, thank
Any
you.
more questions?
Well, just one quick one, I mean, were the ironworks connected to what Fielding Lewis was supporting during the Revolution? In other words, he was maintaining the